I'm going to show you some blues guitar ideas that you can start using right away to add some sophistication to your blues playing. And be sure to stick around till the very end of the lesson because I've got a free gift for you and your guitar that you're going to love. So let's talk about these ideas. So these are going to be great ways to bust out of the pentatonic box. If you're just wailing on the pentatonic all day long when you're playing over a blues, this is going to add some ideas that actually are inspired by what keyboard players tend to do in a situation like this. And it's going to combine the use of double stops as well as triads, and they're going to work over all the chords in a typical blues progression, which are usually the 1 chord, the 4 chord, and the 5 chord. So I'm going to be giving you 3 ideas that you can use in any combination over all 3 chords in your typical blues progression. So starting with the first one, this is the simplest one. It's just going to be using double stops. So what it's essentially going to look like is something like this. So what I was essentially doing there, right? Playing double stops, which are 2-note groupings, starting with the first one, and this is going to be over the 1 chord, which is A. So what I'm doing are outlining certain chord tones or notes within the chord that make them sound musically correct, but also playing them in a way that's kind of tasty. So we're going to start with the, right here, this is the major third. This note right here, which is the 6th fret of the G string with our second finger. Then our first finger is going to play the 5th fret of the B string, which is the 5th. So we have the 3rd and the 5th here. And what I like to do is I like to slide from 1 fret below, slide up to it. Now, all these little embellishments that I'm going to do, these are just options you can throw in whenever they just feel right. It's not something that you have to do every time. But what I'm going to do is essentially illustrate these ideas for you and show you ways that you can not only diversify where they're being placed, in a chord progression, but in how you play them. So you can essentially never run out of ideas, even though you're really only using just 3 ideas. So anyway, we have that first double stop, and then we're going to play the next double stop here, which is, this is going to be the 7th fret on the G string. So we're barring with our first finger, 7th fret on G string, and then 7th fret on B string. And the third double stop is here on the 9th fret of the G string and the 8th fret of the B string. And so those 3 work great over, in this case, the 1 chord. So if I'm droning that A note, right, then of course those little embellishments like I was talking about, right? Just like sliding up from 1 fret below. You can do that on all of them if you want. Just kind of add a little push to them, give them a little bit of flavor. But, use your discretion and just kind of, however you want to do it. That's something I like to do is like, I'll do that on the first and the third one. So. That's just how I like to do it. But of course, I leave it up to you to do it however you want to do it, whatever feels right, like I said. So that's the first one, right? So that's if we're playing it over the 1 chord in A, but the 4 chord and the 5 chord, right, which are D and E, all we got to do is take this exact same sort of shape, this pattern that we did here with these 3 double stops and adapt them to the new chords, right? So if we're going to do it to the 4 chord, D, we're going to pretty much take the same shape that we did over here, right? But we're going to conveyor belt it up, right, to the 11th fret on the G string and the 10th fret on the A string. And then the second double stop is going to be barred the 12 frets on G and B. And then we're going to be playing 14 on G, 13 on B. All right, so we have, let me play there you go, an open D. So it works over the 4 chord as well. So all I do to bring it up to the 5 chord is just bring that up 2 frets. So we have that first double stop on 13 and 12, right? Still on the G and the B strings. Then the second one's going to be a 14th fret, right? Barring on the 14th fret. Then we're going to be 16th fret and 15th fret. So if I were to play if I were to drone an E note, all right, that's the 5 chord, and then playing it over the 4 chord, D, and then over the 1 chord. That's the thing I like about A, particularly that key when playing a blues, is because you can just drone out the root note of, each chord with just the open string. So that's how to illustrate how you can take that same idea, that same pattern, that same shape, and just conveyor belt it up the fretboard to adapt to the different chords. So you can almost think of it like you're changing keys with the changing chords, which is something that, it's a technique that's very common and used a lot with professional musicians. And it works so long as you time it right? You want to make sure that you're changing keys to the appropriate chord. So if you know that the 4 chord is coming, right, D, right, and you want to play the appropriate, thing to go along with it, so that way it works perfectly. And of course, the end result is you sound a lot smarter as a guitar player. So that's the first of the 3 ideas. The next one is going to be these cool little triads here. So, and then all manner of different ways that we can play them. So starting on the 1 chord, right? We're going to start here with, now I like to do it this way where I have my first finger just kind of available because I can add like additional notes. So I recommend you do it this way. You use your 3rd finger. We're going to be on the 7th fret of the D string. And then our 2nd finger is going to be on the 6th fret of the G string. Then our pinky is on the 7th fret of B. So that's all going to be between the D, G, and B strings. So those 3 notes, and then we essentially bring it down 2 frets, but this still works over just 1 chord. If you've heard that T-Bone Walker song, "Papa Ain't Salty," you hear a lot of that going on, right? So that's kind of the inspiration for this. So what you're going to do is you're going to play that, but you can also kind of work it, chromatically a little bit. Since you're going the distance of 2 frets, you can go down each individual fret like, or there's a lot of different ways you can do it, You can slide them like that, or you can go. You just think about, you're just going the distance of these 2 frets, right? So you can do it however you want. You can navigate however you get there. You can find all kinds of creative ways to do it, which again, if they feel right and if the timing's good, you can do it chromatically, or you can do slides, whatever works. And then with our first finger here, one thing we can do is, so for example, if we're playing it right here, right on between the 7th and 6th frets here, with our first finger, we can grab the 5th fret of the high E string, add that extra note, and we can do the same thing, right? If we bring it down, right? So it's just an additional way to add some more flavor to it. Now, if we were to adapt this to the 4 chord, right, D, we're going to take the same stratagem, right, which is to conveyor belt this up. So we're now going to accommodate it to where the 4 chord is. So we're here on the 12th fret of the D string, 11th fret of the G string, 12th fret of the B string, right, and then we're just going down 2 frets. So between those 2 right there. So we're right here would be 10th fret, 9th fret, 10th fret. And same thing with our first finger. So for example, if you were to go back and forth between the chords and you wanted to employ this just this one idea, simple idea, right? You can change it up to where it doesn't feel repetitive. So you can do something like this. You can go like, right? Then when you get to the 4 chord, right? So it's taking the same idea, but making small changes to it so that the overall end result is not something repetitive that can, you can get tired of easily. It actually diversifies it enough to where you're playing some pretty cool stuff and it never ever feels boring. And by the way, if you're getting a lot out of this lesson, be sure to hit that like button and consider subscribing to our YouTube channel if you haven't already. Really helps us out and also lets me know that you're liking these lessons and that I should keep doing this and bringing you more. And now that we got that out of the way, let's get right back into it. Now finally moving it up to the 5 chord. Same thing, right? We just move it up 2 frets. So we're now going to be on 14, 13, and 14. All right, and then we bring it down 2 frets, 12, 11, 12. that's a cool thing about, just to keep in mind, when we're adapting the same shape and just adjusting it to a different spot on the fretboard as opposed to finding a new shape, that's a little bit more in the neighborhood of the 1 chord, is that all we're doing is we're just a distance between 2 frets for the 4 chord and the 5 chord. So we take the same idea and we just adapt it 2 frets. So it's much less of a jump, from starting with the 1 chord. So and then if you want to bring it back home to the 1 chord, there's just different ways that you can do it. So that's the second idea. And the third idea is actually going to be something similar as far as using triads, but it's actually going to start in a different sort of way. We're going to be starting with the 1 chord further up the fretboard here. So the idea goes like this. And that's over the 1 chord, right? Over A. What we're essentially doing, kind of the bare bones of it, are we're just barring, starting on the 14th fret, right? On the G, B, and high E strings. Then 13, then 12. So it's really just going back and forth between 14 and 13. Or sorry, 14 and 12, and including 13 in there if we want to chromaticize it. All right, but if we want to embellish that additional note, what we're going to do is we're going to take our pinky, right, which is essentially, we'd be playing a root note here. So you can use your pinky or your third finger, whatever you're most comfortable with. And you'd be playing right there the 17th fret, right? That's the 17th fret. Yeah, the 17th fret of the high E string. And then when you bring it down, right, bring it down to the 15th fret as our little extra bonus embellishy note. And that's over the 1 chord, right? But if we're going to play it over the 4 and the 5 chord, we're going to be adapting it further down, right, down in the fretboard. So starting with the 4 chord, right, which if we were to find it in this position here, it would be right here, D, D7, same as this, same chord, but we're going to be doing this. We're now taking that little barred triad here from the 7th fret, so it's between the 7th fret and the 5th fret. All right, if we're going to add that additional bonus note, just think of it like this. It's just 3 frets from where you're barring, right? So 1, 2, 3, and then if we bring it down here, 1, 2, 3, there it is. Almost like if you're familiar with finding octaves, right? That whole method where you're going down, if you're starting from one note, going down 2 strings and over 3 frets. That is if you're finding the octave note starting on the G string, right? Same kind of idea, only we're barring. And we are finding an octave, right? We're finding an octave of the first note that we're fretting with our first finger, right? Just to tell you that it's not like a new note, it's the same note, but it being in an upper octave still adds enough variety and embellishment to it that it can make it sound good, And if we're going to play the 5 chord, right, so we've gone over the 4 chord, 5 chord is just 2 frets up, 1, 2. There's an E7, right, same as here. There it is. All right, we're going to start with that barred triad on the 9th fret, so it's between the 9th fret and the 7th fret here. And so 9th fret barring G, B, and E. All right, and then we have 7th fret. And of course, we got that 8th fret just to add some movement to it if we so choose. So just from that, I mean, we've kind of exponentially added a whole bunch of little individual things that are just based off of these 3 ideas. We have those double stops, and then we have those 2 different types of triads that are in on different strings and in different positions on the fretboard. But with just enough, all it takes is just a little bit of discernment on like where to throw them in there. And of course, that'll come with time and experimentation and that kind of thing. You can actually pass off like not just a great guitar playing, but it just makes you sound like a really competent blues player that's employing like tactics that normally a keyboard player or an organ player would do. And just so you know, you can totally employ these ideas when you're soloing. So think of it this way. If you're playing some pentatonic lines, in between them, you can throw in these little triads or these double stops, these kind of moving ideas, just to add some more sophistication to what you're doing. So let me demonstrate how that would sound. So when you're first starting to incorporate these kind of ideas in your soloing, it's okay if it's a little bit patchwork in the beginning, where you're like, okay, this measure I'm playing a lick, this measure I'm playing a little slidey triad thing, and then just kind of feeling it out and seeing what works best for you. But over time, you're going to get more comfortable with them and even get more creative in how you use them. So to quickly recap, let's go over these ideas over each chord. So starting over the one chord, we got our double stops, right? All right, that's one idea. And then the second idea were those slidey triads, right, between the D, G, and B strings. Then our third idea, we had those barred triads, right, where we're going to be starting on the 14th fret, right, between the 14th and 12th frets here on the G, B, and high E strings. All right, now if we wanted to adapt it to the 4 chord, we'd have the double stops here. All right, the slidey triads right in the same neighborhood. And then the bar triads over here between the 7th and 5th frets. And keep in mind, these triads right here and these are actually the same. But what's different about them is they have a little bit different of a timbre because of the type of strings that are being used, right? That we're using the thinner unwound strings, like for the barred versions of them, right? But they also give a little bit of a different sound just based on their positioning too. So it actually helps that there's a lot of sort of traversing on the fretboard that goes on. So that way, if you're, let's say, navigating between, you're starting on the one chord and you're playing a couple of those little ideas in this neighborhood, right? So if you're going like, and the 4 chord comes along, you can go straight into, instead of having to go all the way up here. And so it makes it a little bit easier that way. So it kind of weaves everything together so that you have these ideas accessible at any point, whether you're playing one of the ideas in this neighborhood or this neighborhood, then you got another one just right around the corner. So that way you're never having to find yourself jumping back and forth, on too much space on the fretboard. And then of course, finally, over the 5 chord, you have your, and then up here between the 9th and 7th frets. So basically you're getting 3 for 3 there. You got 3 chords, and with each chord you have 3 ideas you can add to it on top of your regular soloing. So when you're wailing on the pentatonic scale and you're throwing in these other ideas, you've essentially exponentially increased the amount of ways that you can approach your blues solos. And speaking of blues solos, now that you have this powerful tool added to your blues repertoire, what do you say I give you that free gift I was telling you about? Well, I happen to have it for you right here. It's a blues solo heat map that is designed specifically for playing red hot blues guitar solos all over the fretboard, and it's yours free for watching this lesson. So be sure to click here to claim your copy or check the link in the description box. And with that, I want to say thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you've enjoyed this lesson as much as I've enjoyed bringing it to you. I'm Eddie with Guitar Mastery Method, and I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.